And with the Supreme Court ruling, we wanted to welcome you all here to the webinar to ensure that we are all staying ahead and we are all knowing exactly what to expect with the affirmative action ruling that just happened. As a New York City public school graduate, I'm a graduate of the Bronx High School of Science. I attended the Sophie Davis program, which is also called CUNY Medical School. From there, I went on to SUNY Downstate for my medical degree and my master's in public health. Later on, I earned my alumni status from Columbia University through some certificates and degrees completed at their business school, as well as my college advising certificate at the Teachers College. It's my privilege to introduce our two college advisors today. We have Ms. Sadia Lysa and Ms. Sabiha Amin. We have a tremendously powerful workshop and webinar for you all to learn from, and I'll hand the floor over to Ms. Sadia, who will start with the intros, and we'll hear from Ms. Sabiha, and then we'll get right to the content for today.
Thank you, Evan. Hello, everyone. My name is Sadia, and I am a new college admissions advisor on Khan's team. I attended Queens High School for the Sciences in New York, in Queens. It's one of the specialized high schools. And then I went on to attend Harvard. And I just recently graduated this year in May, got my bachelor's in molecular and cellular biology, and did a minor in ethnicity, migration, and rights. I'm currently on the pre-med track, applying to medical schools and hoping to pursue that field in the future. I'm really excited to be on the team.
Hello, my name is Sabiha Amin, and surprise, surprise, I'm also a college admission guidance counselor. So some background about me: I just graduated from Stuyvesant High School this past June, and I will also be attending Harvard College starting this fall, hopefully under the Human Developmental and Regenerative Biology track. And hopefully maybe even pre-med, we will see. We'll take the time to explore. So yeah, that's just a little information about me. But today we're going to focus our webinar on the recent rulings in higher education, specifically affirmative action and student loan forgiveness. So I'm going to give it off to Sadia first to help get some idea of the cases.
All right. So as you might all already know, on June 29, the Supreme Court ruled affirmative action unconstitutional. And this is just a graphic kind of showing the justices on either side. You can also see that it was divided along party lines as well. So Republicans were majority for unconstitutional, and then the Democrats were dissenting. Let's go to the next slide. So to start off, we need to understand what affirmative action is. According to the definition given by Merriam-Webster, it's the use of policies, legislation, programs, and procedures to improve the educational or employment opportunities of members of certain demographic groups, such as minority groups, women, and older people, as a remedy to the effects of long-standing discrimination against such groups. We want to highlight that this applies to admission in both educational programs and employment. It actually started off for employment with what we'll see in later on a bill signed by President Kennedy in 1961, but it attempts to remedy prior discrimination in admissions and employment with regards to race, creed, color, or national origin. Just to give you a little bit of legal history, as I was saying, it may be surprising, but affirmative action's first legal appearance was in the context of discrimination in employment in an executive order by President Kennedy in 1961 to ensure fair employment practices. And the goals of affirmative action with regards to employment are held within the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The EEOC enforces laws that make discrimination illegal in the workplace. The commission oversees all types of work situations, including hiring, firing, promotions, harassment, training, wages, and benefits. So moving on to the more educational context, most of you might be familiar with the case Brown versus Board of Education that took place in 1954. This was a landmark decision that concluded the separate educational facilities for Black and white students were inherently unequal and perpetuated a sense of inferiority among Black children. This really marked a significant turning point in the civil rights movement and set the stage for desegregation efforts in schools and other public institutions across the country.
Okay,
Send it off to Cynthia.
so thank you. So we're going to first look at some statistics behind selective admission. So and these are some competitive schools that we have listed under all three charts, including University of Texas, Princeton, Harvard, UC Berkeley, Yale, and U Michigan. The percent of Hispanic students has increased over the years, but the national average currently reaches to be about 16 to 17%. For percent of Black students, there has been a slight rise in general, but the national average is about 13%, which is a lot higher than what we see in competitive schools like our Ivy Leagues and UC schools. Then we have the national average for white population of students, which in 2010 was about 65%, which has decreased, but it's still a significantly higher national average. Now, in terms of legacy admissions at a glance, just so to get a gear of what people are aware of whether or not what exactly legacy is, can someone in the chat or can unmute what exactly is legacy admissions in terms of colleges? If you have any guess at all, feel free to list it in the chat or unmute.
My name is Fariha, and I think legacy admissions is like if both your parents go to a certain Ivy League college, I guess, the child is automatically admitted there. I don't know if it's both or just one parent.
Well, you hit on the ball. It doesn't necessarily have to be both parents, but let's say your father was a graduate of NYU, for instance, you have legacy admission to NYU, which means you have a higher chance of getting admitted to that school because your parents went there. So, for example, if both of your parents went to Harvard, you have a significantly higher chance of getting into Harvard than the student who didn't have that background. So here are some statistics to put that into consideration. So one, in terms of top athlete and legacy and low income, significantly less percentage offered to low income compared to legacy, which is about like 50%. In general, our Ivy League acceptance is on the bottom left. You can know that Ivy League acceptance rates for legacy, which is in red, is significantly higher than non-legacy. For talking about Harvard, it's 40% to 11%. And then most recently for the class of 2024, legacy enrollment versus Black enrollment at top ranked universities is a complete difference, where we see schools like Notre Dame, which has a 20% legacy acceptance rate compared to a Black enrollment of about 3%. So this is very commonly seen in a lot of our elite institutions and has continued to remain consistent. Now, admission rates at selective institutions. So let's get a hand of how selective are these schools. So we have Princeton, which currently has an acceptance rate of about like 4.5%. And then we have Harvard following, and then Yale around the same range. So we see consistently year after year, these acceptance rates are very, very low. You have applicant pools from over almost 100,000 applications to only accepting 2,000 to 3,000 students within their class. And that has made a huge difference, especially with COVID spikes and exactly increases in higher education. So selective institutions continue to grow even more selective. Now, how exactly do you see race within the college application process? So first thing is the common application. Just another, try to get some interaction involved. Does anyone know what exactly the common application is and what it entails? You can put it in the chat or unmute. No ideas? That's okay. That's okay. If you want to raise your hand, I don't think I see any reason. Okay, that's okay. We can go over it. That's actually what part of the job of what Sadia and I do, which is kind of guide you through the college application process. So a huge component is the common application, which is a portal that you apply to colleges, a maximum of 20 colleges within. This can range from your SUNYs to a lot of your public schools, such as University of Michigan, NYU, oh, I know it's private, but NYU, and then even Ivy League institutions. So how exactly do you see race within the common application? You are asked to write down, or in this case, check mark, what category of race you fall under. And the goal inherently is to ensure consistent consideration of minority groups to address his past historical precedent in which race wasn't equally considered. So to add on to how we see it within the college application, two specific schools that we're going to focus on is Harvard University and then University of North Carolina, especially UNC Chapel Hill. They each, within their application, is scored within 6 categories. We have academic, extracurricular, athletic, school support, personal, and overall. And race is considered within the overall category. So if you fall within a certain race, you receive a few number of points. So that's how the system had worked for the past few years under affirmative action. Now, the Students for Fair Admissions is an organization, a nonprofit organization that filed separate lawsuits against Harvard and UNC, arguing that their race-based admissions programs violated the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which ensured the equality rights for all. Now, on June 29th, which is the recent uproar of the Supreme Court, it struck down the affirmative action.
Question. I'm so sorry, Ms. Sabia. I'm not sure if you wanted to pause for the question or hold off till the end. It's in the chat box.
Oh, I can take the question. It's totally fine.
Go for it.
What do they mean by school support in one of the categories? 1 second. Oh, school support means school involvement, right? So if you're part of the school debate team, you're part of the school student union, how exactly are you supporting your school community? Because there can be extracurriculars outside of your school community, such as you're part of your neighborhood's basketball team, something like that. Any other clarifying questions? 1 second. Got it. Perfect. So as I was saying, so on June 29th, the uproar struck of the Supreme Court, who struck down affirmative action in college admissions, specifically declaring within their statement, the Harvard and UNC admissions programs cannot be reconciled with the guarantees of the Equal Protection Clause. And this overturned over 45 years of cases that allowed precedent of affirmative action. Now, what exactly has colleges responded to this? How are they going to deal with affirmative action? Still, a lot is very vague, but here are a few things that presidents of several selective Ivy League institutions have said. So past President Lawrence Bacow, president of Harvard, announced that Harvard will continue to be a vibrant community whose members come from all walks of life all over the world. They haven't clarified how so they would be going about addressing this approach, but that's just a general statement they made. Lee Bollinger, president of Columbia, stated, as we prepare to comply with the law, our commitment to our values is unwavering. Diversity is a positive force across every dimension of Columbia, and we can and must find a durable and meaningful path to preserve it. And then lastly, Liz McGill, current president of UPenn, we will seek ways to admit individual students who will contribute to the kind of essential community that is essential to Penn's educational mission. So common pattern that we see is schools ensuring students that they will contain a diverse background within their students, but we don't know exactly how they will approach to do that within the admission process. And it's very unlikely that it will be admitted within the next first 2 cycles of college admissions, so probably later on down the line. So how can we understand what will happen over the next 2 years in admissions due to lack of affirmative action? One is a decrease in minority students. So 9 states have already prohibited any consideration of race in admissions to their public colleges and universities. So one example is California. Back in 1996, they had a Proposition 209 that resulted in UC Berkeley and UCLA experiencing a 60% drop in Black, Latinx, and Indigenous students, and that was over time. But if you see within the chart after it was admitted, from 1997 to 1998, there's drastic, almost 10% drop in Black populations, in Native American populations, and Chicano populations, and Latino populations. And this is over the course of 1 year. So we can't exactly say what will happen over a long span of time, but this is just what we might see parallel to our current status quo. And then another case in 2006, after Michigan banned race-conscious admissions, Black undergraduate enrollment at the University of Michigan dropped from 7% in 2006 to 4% in 2021. Now, how can we address this, or what can we do to stand out specifically for your application? The biggest point is find alternative ways to express yourself and your identity, especially if they make a meaningful impact to who you are. We currently can't click a checkbox anymore to address a big portion of what our identity might be and what a lot of the experiences we have. Instead, you need to find alternative ways in which you can express your story. And the huge point is you don't have to, you're not required to, but if you think it has made a meaningful impact in your life, we heavily encourage students to, in some way or form, address that within their application. So how can you exactly do that? So one, extracurricular activities. What are some extracurriculars that can take part in that reveal your culture, heritage, and religion? How have that played integral parts to your life. Many important ways is like joining organizations that advocate for equity and human rights for your culture or for your religion. So there's Muslim Student Association, Black Students League, or Latino Community Association. These are all clubs or existing organizations that can help assist in learning about your experiences, but you can also share with college admission officers that it's a huge part of your identity, hence why you're part of those communities, and maybe even take leading positions in them, especially if it's an integral part to who you are. Now, the second way is showcase your identity in your essays. So these are a lot more personable and a lot more, I would say personally as a counselor, it's a unique way of approaching the idea, because you not only talk about, okay, here's an organization of people that stand with this, but here's my specific experiences. So these are just some guiding questions. Think about how you want to express your identity and background in your personal statement or supplemental essays, how much you contribute to a school's diversity. So did you take any initiative or programs to implement within your school to help assist with this? Why does your identity matter when it comes to classroom conversations and campus communities? And think about how unique background is important to who you are and what your college experience will be like. Maybe you can find communities also within this college. Like for me, as a Bengali student, I found Harvard Basha, which is their Bengali association and community. And it's something I even put in my application, and Sadia here was the president of Basha. So that's like the way that community builds is very, very integral and important. And that's just one example of it. All right. And then what else can we see within the status quo to address affirmative action? So recently in a report by New York Times, it talks about the socioeconomic disadvantage scale. Now, what exactly is this? Multiple University of California schools since 1996 have used this scale in place of affirmative action. So what it does is the school rates applicants from 0 to 99, taking into account life circumstances such as family income and parental education. And multiple higher educations have reached out about this with the UC schools in order to consider utilizing their SED scale. For context of how this impacts your class size, UC Davis's medical school was one of the first to actually implement the SED scale. And right now it's known as one of the most diverse medical schools within the US. So a huge talk around it is, can it work nationally in place of affirmative action, or is it not feasible? And that is it for the affirmative action case. So before we move on to student loan forgiveness, which Sadia will cover, are there any questions that you guys have? Feel free to put them in the chat, or Ivan can help assist with that.
I'd like to first of all thank our presenters so far on part one of today's fantastic webinar. I'd like to ask the audience to join me in a warm round of applause, whether it's through our emojis or through the chat box. But we'd really love some questions. As graduates of colleges in the United States, a lot of us here are the first person in this country to attend college, with most of our families having earned college degrees elsewhere in the world. So, a lot of this can affect how our applications will be, whether you're a parent joining us tonight, whether you're a student. And if you are a student, we'd love to make sure your parents are here with you so you folks can all understand how this will impact you. So with that said, we'd love to open it up for some questions. We'll give you folks 1 or 2 minutes for some questions. We'll let the meeting continue, and I'll turn the floor back to the presenters. We'll do the Q&A, and then we'll definitely talk about student loan forgiveness and how that can impact a lot of us. The charges of these elite schools, these highly selective schools, can be anywhere from $60,000 to $70,000, upwards of $80,000 if you're counting room, board, and a lot of other items. And oftentimes, sadly, we end up with tens of even hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. Our goal at Khan's Tutorial, and our goal for our South Asian first generation Bangladeshi community and all of our allies, is that we can all find the best college that's a great fit for all of us while keeping the costs at a minimum. So we'd love to have more grants, more scholarships, and less loans that we may have to get stuck with paying back for the rest of our lives. So with that said, I'll turn the floor back to our presenters, and we'll start the Q&A as we move over to the student loan forgiveness portion. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ivan. Fariha, you have a question?
Yeah, so I have two questions. So one, are you basically saying that on the college application they're clueless of what your race is? They're just either accepting you or denying you?
Before, if we consider like how affirmative action was implemented in the Harvard and UNC case, it was like you were given a specific score for being of a certain race. In this case, they don't ask you any questions of that. It's not even like an option anymore. So I guess in that way, yes, it's just everything's the same except those questions are taken out of the common application.
Okay, and you said you guys recommend putting like showcasing your identity and expressing yourself through your personal essays, but what if your personal essay is something that, like, for example, in your personal essay you want to portray that you're like good character traits about yourself, about something that you do pretty often, but it has nothing to do with like your race or really expressing your identity that you're born with. So how would you go about that? And do you think that just not including, I mean, when I'm talking about identity, I mean like race and things like that. So if I don't include that in my essay, like, would you recommend, and what do you think about that?
I can start by answering, but Sadia can totally add in whatever you want. What I say is it's ultimately up to your discretion of what you think is the most important thing you want to highlight to the admission officers. So if you think it is really important for you, there's like an integral experience, or you think it's a very, very important part of your character, there are ways you can express it. So you don't necessarily have to put in your personal statement, which is your big essay. A lot of schools have their supplemental essays, especially these elite institutions, and they ask ways in which, like, what are ways in which you've helped your community, or what are, just talk about like a little something that's important to you. Schools will just have questions like that that are very open-ended. And if you think that's a considerable space for you to talk about an experience about your race or identity, that's where I would recommend for you to do it. But it's not like you have to do this. It's up to your discretion as to whether you think it's important to your character.
Okay, yeah, I understand.
Would I be able to ask a follow-up question? To Ms. Sadia and Ms. Sabiha, our counselors and our admissions guidance counselors, your ethnic background and your race, for the sake of this conversation, is one aspect of what they're looking at holistically. And, what are the other factors before the Supreme Court ruling that a place like Harvard would be looking at? I would assume that they're not just looking at race and it's just a yes or no based on that. Just overall, anything else you want to mention? Because we do have our next public workshop that's open to everyone on Saturday, where we'll discuss what they're looking for. But I do want us to maybe address that for just 30 seconds or a minute, so we can appreciate anything else that they might be looking at while this conversation is more on the ruling.
Yeah, definitely. It's not just your race or ethnicity or your culture that they're going to look at. Everybody is unique. You all have unique interests. If you are, for example, if you're really good at playing the piano, or if you've spent like many, many years playing volleyball, those are things that set you apart from others that you can talk about. It doesn't have to be just your race-based story or like your cultural story. It could be research, it could be activism in your community, it could be volunteering in different capacities within your school, outside of your school. You can talk about all of the activities that you do. So don't be too afraid. It doesn't, what matters is how you can tell your story. And also don't hesitate to incorporate how race has affected your experience throughout your life as well. But don't limit yourself to just that. Sophia, I don't know if you want to add in.
We hope that tackles the incredible start to the Q&A for the first part of today's presentation. We do have some questions coming in. So I'm going to tackle the shorter one first, and then we'll tackle the larger question, if that's all right. So this question is from Divya Powdell. In the college admissions process, does the high school that you attend really matter? From what we understand, there's a high school profile that colleges look at where they match up particular high schools for the socioeconomic index and the number of APs offered and funding. So they may be comparing similar neighboring schools in the suburbs together. They may be looking at some of the top New York City high schools together if they have similar profiles. So when they group these high schools and they kind of compare bucket to bucket, what goes into that? Do you folks want to lend anything what they're looking at from, because the age-old question is, oh my God, if I go to that high school, will I be at a disadvantage or an advantage when applying to these amazing places? So how would you want to tackle that?
Oh, sorry. Sadia, do you want to go first? No? Okay.
You can go first. Yeah, I can.
Okay, perfect. We'll bounce off of each other. So I think what Ivan mentioned, the school profile is so important, because I think initially if you're applying, you might feel overwhelmed, like, oh, I only took 6 APs, but there's this person over here who took 13 APs. And a huge context behind that is, what does your school offer? So there are schools out there that only apply like a maximum of 12 APs, while we have a lot, like for example, the competitive schools within New York City, high schools within New York City can have up to like 24 APs offered. So realistically, they're not going to expect you to take that many APs if your school doesn't offer it. I think it's a very much a case-by-case basis, and the school profile generally addresses that. The school profile has your average SAT, your average GPA, like what area of the city it's within, what is the number of students you have. So I don't necessarily think that idea, like even though some people say like, oh, if you go to a school, you have a higher chance of getting in. I don't think that's necessarily true, because especially the process is very independent and it's driven by your initiative to take advantage of resources. So yeah, I wouldn't exactly tend to that idea.
Yeah, I can add on. I think like Sabia was saying, everyone's application process is very unique. But at the same time, like she was saying, there are schools that have more resources, that have seen a higher admission rate for their students. It depends on, where they're located, whether they're in the center of the city where the students have access to so many opportunities, or like your school is like, I don't know, in the middle of a more rural area, where you might not have as many access to as many different types of resources or classes or extracurricular opportunities, or even like school clubs, depending on like, the interests available within your student body. So there is that difference, but, if you feel like your school is one that doesn't have the opportunities that you think might benefit you, that you are looking for, don't hesitate to create those opportunities for yourself. If there isn't a club that, you're like, oh, my friend at this school is a part of this organization and they find it really meaningful and I wish I could join a club like that, create it within your own school space. Take that initiative. Find something that might be close enough, or find something in your local community that you would love to do that, might not, your school might not have enough resources to direct you towards. I think that does make it harder, but schools, because of that school profile, if you do take those steps on your own, like you will really stand out as an applicant, despite like, your community and like whatever resource that your school might have.
We hope that reassures everyone that, while it may have some positives and negatives of which high school we attend, it's not the end all be all. Colleges recognize that students who get into an elite place, whether it's Columbia University, Harvard, Princeton, they want to have a good, diverse student body. So they don't want everyone from Stuyvesant and Bronx Science. They want to have a good mix of students from everywhere to ensure that they're contributing to that campus in a very positive and well-rounded way. But we do have a really excellent question. Do you have any advice from Alexandra Stamatov? Thank you, Alexandra and family. Do you have any advice on how to incorporate low economic status into the essays? You know, a lot of us, if we're first generation here, you know, we've had the immigrant background. How can you incorporate that into your essay without really going overboard and just having that kind of define everything? You know, like what's the best balance of that? I think that's what the question is. And is that better in the supplemental side of things or the actual side, in case there is an added advantage to have that either in the regular essay or the supplemental? Great question. And finally, how will the new FAFSA deadline impact early decision, early action, and similar options for all of us? So I know we have a lot of terrific questions. I'll let the counselors lead the answers for now.
Yeah, I can take the first part of the question. So I would recommend, I wouldn't want to deter anybody from, you know, talking about any significant challenges you have faced in your life that you think defined you as a person and might be really important to talk about in your personal essay. But I would recommend, if it's not like an overarching theme in your life and in who you are, then you can definitely talk about it in supplemental essays. And how I would recommend you kind of framing that discussion would be like, what kind of challenges have you had to overcome given, like, you know, low socioeconomic status and background, and how you've kind of overcome that, persevered, to show that, you know, despite like difficult financial situations or difficult family contexts, difficult anything, that you were able to overcome those challenges and succeed in the end. And that shows you to be a really great candidate who would be able to handle a lot of the challenges that might come with college, and someone who might care about specifically more disadvantaged communities.
Yeah, I totally agree with Sadia. There are ways that you can incorporate it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like outwards, like in your face, but more so how you've overcome it. But also what I did, I'm also from a first generation low income background. And what I did is, because I had long commutes and I had to work while simultaneously going to school, is there's like a section for additional information under the Common App, and that's where you can talk a little, give more context of the background you came from. So if you don't want to highlight it in your main Common App essay, you totally don't have to. But there's like a COVID essay, additional COVID essay, optional, and there's an optional essay about like, give us any other information that you would like for us to know. And that's where I kind of spoke about like a little bit of the background I came from. So that's some way you can address that. Now, the second part of the question, which is also how does the new FAFSA deadline would impact the ED, EA, and RD options? So the new FAFSA deadline won't impact your decisions in the sense that your financial aid packages will come out distinctly from your acceptances, right? Especially to elite institutions, unlike if it's like a rolling based institution such as Stony Brook, that they might like ask you or call you in like, oh, can you send in your FAFSA application as soon as possible? But for your ED, EA, RD options, you're expected to fill them out a specific deadline for each school. So you should check on each school's website for when their regular decision financial aid application is due and their early application is due. So it really depends school for school, but there won't be any like significant impact that's different than any other year for early options. So just be specific, check on the website. It's always available on any college's websites regarding the deadline. So I would not stress about that.
Terrific questions from families and students. We have time for one last question for the first part of today's webinar, and then we will shift, and that may be the perfect bridge to go into a lot of the financial aid and how student loan forgiveness will impact future financial aid packages. But I think this is a very common question that a lot of juniors and sophomores, juniors, and seniors may have. What if your GPA isn't the best? And it's a little bit lower than what the college traditionally lists as their cutoff for, on the websites and stuff like that. What do you do then? And anything you can add about what you wrote your personal narratives about in case you didn't capture it in previous questions.
Okay, I can take the first part of the question again. What if your GPA is a little low compared to the average? This is why we really advise students to have a balanced school list. It's not like you should not be afraid of having those reach schools on your list where your GPA might be a little bit lower than average. But you should definitely make sure to have target schools that match your GPA, and then safety schools at the same time. And don't be afraid to branch out of New York or the Northeast, because some schools outside are really great and have really, really great financial aid, might have really great financial aid packages for you. And also interests that, might align with yours. So I would recommend having that balanced school list. And then for your reach schools or your dream schools, where your GPA might be a little low, look into how or what the school values. And then when you're writing your personal essay or your supplementary essay for those schools, make sure you write them well and that you can bring in examples from your own life that show qualities that you know that the school is looking for in an applicant. In that case, we would recommend honestly strengthening those additional parts of your application, because at the end of the day, they do say that there's a holistic review process, and that can work to your benefit.
Sorry, 1 second. Okay, I am muted. Perfect.
Go for it. If you want to add anything to that, and we'll go over to our next section.
Yes, Sadia totally hit home on the first question, so I'm not going to address that. But in terms of what I wrote from a personal narrative, I mean, it's a little bit more of like a personal idea, so I'm not going to go over that. But the general idea was showing growth of me as a person, because I was a very introverted person as a child, which is very strange now because I'm known as the extroverted person in my friend group. So kind of showing my shift in socially and how I kind of want to express my shift in being social to the environment that I'm in. So I kind of talk about that in terms of like how I've changed, like physically and mentally as a person. There's like a more personal element to it, but I'm not going to share it on here. But yeah, that's just the general scope of showing how I've grown. And that's a great way for you to kind of show how has your story changed? What obstacles have you faced? So that's some brainstorming ideas.